Ethan never believed in gut feelings. He believed in logic, in patterns, in the predictable rhythm of life that made everything feel safe. He was the kind of man who double-checked locks, who planned weekends 2 weeks in advance, who remembered anniversaries without reminders. Stability wasn't just a preference for him. It was survival. And for 3 years, Neha had been his stability. Or at least, that's what he thought. The night everything shattered started like any other. Rain tapped softly against the windows of their apartment, the kind of gentle drizzle that blurred city lights into watercolor streaks. The living room smelled faintly of vanilla candles Neha loved so much, mixed with the lingering aroma of the pasta Ethan had cooked earlier that evening. He had gone all out. Candles, wine, soft music humming in the background, because tonight mattered. Tonight, Ethan had planned to propose. The small velvet box sat hidden inside his jacket pocket, heavy, not because of its weight, but because of what it carried. A future, a promise, a life built together. He checked the time again. 8:47 p.m. Neha was late. Not unusual. She had been busy a lot lately. Work, meetings, deadlines, excuses that made sense on the surface. But something beneath them had started to feel off. At first, he ignored it. Then he noticed the small things. The way she smiled at her phone. The way she started taking calls. In another room, the way her laughter changed. It wasn't for him anymore. At 9:12 p.m., Ethan's phone buzzed. A message from Neha. Hey, running late. Don't wait up. Eat without me, red heart. Ethan stared at the screen. The heart emoji felt mechanical, like something sent out of habit, not feeling. Still, he typed back. All good. Be safe. He put the phone down, then picked it up again. Something inside him wouldn't sit still. By 9:40 p.m., the food had gone cold. By 10:05 p.m., the candles had melted halfway down. By 10:32 p.m., Ethan made a decision that would change everything. He grabbed his keys. The rain had gotten heavier by the time he stepped outside. Streetlights reflected off the wet asphalt, creating shimmering gold patterns beneath his feet. His car engine hummed to life, the soft purr doing little to quiet the growing storm inside his chest. He told himself he wasn't suspicious. He was just checking. That's all. Just checking. Neha had mentioned she'd be working late at her office downtown. But when Ethan pulled into the building's parking lot, her car wasn't there. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. A slow, creeping cold spread through his chest. Maybe she parked somewhere else, he muttered to himself. But deep down, he already knew. That's when his phone buzzed again. Not a message this time. A notification from an unknown number. Ethan frowned, then opened it. A single image loaded slowly on his screen. And in that moment, the world stopped. It was Neha. There was no mistaking it. Her long dark hair falling over her shoulders. The red dress he had bought her just 2 weeks ago. The same one she said she was saving for a special occasion. But it wasn't the dress that broke him. It was who she was wearing it for. She was sitting across from another man, leaning forward, smiling. Not the polite smile she gave strangers. Not the comfortable smile she gave Ethan. This was different. This was alive. And then the next image came. This one closer. Her hand on his. Ethan's breathing slowed. Too slow, like his body didn't know how to react. Another message followed. Thought you should know. No name. No explanation. Just truth. Raw. Unfiltered. Cruel. Ethan didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, something else took over. Something colder. Something sharper. The location tag on the image blinked at the bottom. A restaurant. Upscale. Dim lighting. Private booths. Ethan knew the place. Of course he did. Neha had once said, "It's too expensive. Not worth it." 20 minutes later, Ethan was standing outside that very restaurant. Rain soaked through his shirt, clinging to his skin, but he didn't feel it. His reflection stared back at him through the glass doors. Unfamiliar. Distant. Like he was looking at someone else. Inside, the air was warm. Soft jazz floated through the space. The smell of grilled steak and expensive wine filled the room. It felt like stepping into another world. A world where everything was perfect, except it wasn't. Ethan's eyes scanned the room. Once, twice, then he saw her. Neha sat in a corner booth, her back partially turned toward the entrance. Across from her sat the man, tall, well-dressed, confident, the kind of man Ethan had never tried to be. They were laughing. God, they were laughing. Ethan felt something crack inside him. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, irreversible break. He walked toward them, each step heavier than the last, but steady, controlled. Neha noticed him first. Her smile froze, her face drained of color. Ethan! Her voice shook. The man across from her turned, confusion flickering across his face. Ethan stopped at their table. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ethan did something unexpected. He smiled, not out of happiness, but because at that moment, something inside him had died, and what replaced it was something far more dangerous. Nice place, Ethan said calmly, glancing around. Neha opened her mouth, but no words came out. The man looked between them. You know each other? Ethan let out a soft chuckle, then looked straight at him. Oh, we do, he said. A pause. Then, I'm her boyfriend. Silence dropped like a stone. Heavy, unavoidable. The man's expression shifted instantly, from confusion to realization to something almost impressed. Neha stood up quickly. Ethan, I can explain. But Ethan raised a hand. Don't, he said softly. Not angry, not loud, just final. He reached into his jacket. For a second, Neha's eyes widened, hope flickering across her face. Maybe she thought, maybe she believed, he was still going to propose. Instead, he pulled out the velvet box, opened it, looked at the ring, then closed it again. Wrong night, he said quietly, then placed the box on the table. Between them, like a piece of evidence. Neha's eyes filled with tears. Please, it's not what it looks like. Ethan laughed. This time, it wasn't soft. It was hollow. Really, he said, because it looks exactly like what it is. The man across the table leaned back, slightly, silent now, watching. Ethan looked at Neha one last time, and for a brief second, the past flashed in his mind. Late night talks, shared dreams, promises whispered in the dark. All of it gone. You didn't just cheat, Ethan said quietly. You lied every single day. Neha broke down. I didn't mean for it to happen. That's the thing, Ethan cut in. You did. Another silence, this one heavier. Then Ethan stepped back, straightened his jacket, and said something neither of them would ever forget. I hope he was worth it. And just like that, he walked away. But as the restaurant doors closed behind him, as the rain hit his face again, as the cold air filled his lungs, Ethan made a promise. Not out loud, not dramatic, but absolute. She broke me. Now I'm going to rebuild myself. In a way she'll never recover from. The rain didn't stop that night, and neither did the storm inside Ethan. By the time he reached his apartment, his clothes were soaked through, his shoes leaving wet footprints across the hardwood floor, but he didn't bother changing. The silence inside felt louder than anything outside. Just a few hours ago, this place had been filled with anticipation, warmth, and hope. Now it felt like a hollow shell, like a stage after performance was over, where all that remained were echoes. The candles had burned down completely, leaving behind thin trails of smoke curling into the air. The dinner sat untouched on the table, cold and forgotten, just like everything Ethan thought he had with Neha. He stood there for a long time, staring at the life he had built, realizing how fragile it had been all along. And then, slowly, something shifted. The pain didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It sharpened, hardened, became something else entirely. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat by the window, watching the rain fall endlessly over the city, replaying every moment of the past 3 years in his mind. Every laugh, every late-night conversation, every promise, now tainted. He began to notice things he had ignored before. The inconsistencies, the small lies, the emotional distance that had crept in so gradually he hadn't even realized it was happening. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a slow erosion of truth, and he had been blind to it. But what hurt more than anything wasn't the cheating itself. It was the realization that he had given everything to someone who had already checked out long before he ever suspected it. By morning, exhaustion had settled into his bones, but his mind was clearer than it had ever been. Ethan wasn't the kind of man who reacted impulsively. He analyzed, he calculated, and right now, he was doing exactly that. Revenge for him wasn't about shouting or confrontation. It wasn't about causing a scene or demanding answers. No, Ethan's version of revenge would be something far more precise, something that would last, something that would make Neha feel what he felt, not just for a moment, but deeply, permanently. His phone buzzed around 10 a.m. A message from Neha. Of course it was. He stared at her name on the screen for a long moment before opening it. "Please talk to me. I'm so sorry. It was a mistake." Ethan almost smiled. A mistake. That word again. People always use that word when they didn't want to admit the truth, that their actions were choices, not accidents. He didn't reply. Not yet. Silence, he realized, was far more powerful than any words he could say. Instead, his thoughts drifted somewhere unexpected. To her. To someone he hadn't thought about in a long time. Her sister. Anaya. The irony of it all almost made him laugh. In 3 years of being with Neha, he had met Anaya only a handful of times. She'd always been different, quieter, more reserved. While Neha thrived on attention, always the center of every room, Anaya seemed to exist on the edges, observing, listening, never demanding to be seen. If Neha was fire, bright and consuming, then Anaya was something else entirely. Steady calm, almost invisible unless you truly looked. And Ethan realized with a strange clarity that he had never really looked. The memory surfaced slowly. A family dinner about a year ago. Neha had been late, as usual, leaving Ethan alone with her parents and Anaya. It had been awkward at first, filled with polite small talk, until something unexpected happened. Anaya had made a quiet comment, something subtle, almost dry, and Ethan had laughed, not out of politeness, but genuinely. It had caught him off guard, and for a brief moment, their eyes had met, and there had been something there. Not romantic, not intense, just understanding. Like two people who didn't quite belong in the same room, but found comfort in that shared feeling. He hadn't thought about that moment again. Until now. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his mind beginning to connect that he hadn't even realized existed. This wasn't about using someone. That wasn't who he was. But there was something deeper here. Something that felt less like revenge and more like inevitability. Before he could overthink it, he picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts. It didn't take long to find her name. Anaya. His thumb hovered over the screen for a second. Then he pressed call. The ringing felt longer than it actually was. Each second stretching, heavy with possibility. Finally, she answered. "Hello?" Her voice was soft, careful. Ethan swallowed slightly, suddenly aware of how strange this was. "Hey, Anaya, it's Ethan." A pause. Not long, but noticeable. "I know," she said quietly. Of course she did. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Listen, this might sound random, but are you free today?" Another pause. This one different. More thoughtful. "Why?" Fair question. Ethan looked out the window, watching the city move on like nothing had happened. "I just need to talk to someone who isn't going to lie to me." Silence. But it wasn't empty. It felt heavy. Then finally, "Okay," she said. They met that afternoon at a small cafe tucked away from the main streets. It wasn't the kind of place Neha would ever choose. Too quiet, too simple, too real. But for Ethan, it felt right. Anaya was already there when he arrived, sitting by the window, a book open in front of her, though she wasn't reading. She looked up as he approached, and for a moment, everything slowed. She looked almost exactly the same, but not quite. There was something in her eyes now, something sharper, like she knew more than she was saying. "Hey!" Ethan said, pulling out the chair across from her. "Hey!" she replied. Simple. No drama. No fake warmth. Just real. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Anaya closed her book gently. "You found out," she said. It wasn't a question. Ethan blinked. "You knew?" She held his gaze. "I suspected." A beat. Then, "I just didn't think you'd find out like that." Ethan let out a slow breath, leaning back in his chair. "Yeah, neither did I." The conversation that followed wasn't loud. It wasn't emotional in the way people expect. No shouting, no tears. But it was raw, honest in a way Ethan hadn't experienced in a long time. He told her everything. The messages, the photos, the restaurant, the ring. And she listened, really listened, not interrupting, not judging, just understanding. When he finished, there was a long silence between them. Then Anaya spoke. "She doesn't deserve you." Ethan looked at her, really looked this time, and for the first time, he saw her, not as Neha's sister, not as someone in the background, but as someone real, someone different. And in that moment, without even realizing it, something shifted. Not revenge, not yet, but something that would eventually become far more powerful than revenge itself. Because sometimes the best way to destroy someone isn't to break them, it's to replace them. The cafe meeting should have been a one-time thing. That's what Ethan told himself as he walked out that afternoon, the cool breeze brushing against his face, carried with the faint scent of roasted coffee and rain-soaked pavement. It should have been nothing more than a conversation, a moment of clarity after chaos. But as he drove home, something lingered. Not pain, not anger, something quieter, something unsettling. Anaya's voice echoed in his mind, calm and steady, cutting through the noise that had consumed him for days. "She doesn't deserve you." Simple words, yet they had landed deeper than anything Neha had ever said to him. That night, for the first time since everything fell apart, Ethan slept. Not peacefully, but deeply enough to escape the constant replay of betrayal. And when he woke up, the world felt different. Not better, but clearer, like a fog had lifted, revealing truths he had been too blinded to see before. His phone, however, brought reality crashing back in. Missed calls, messages, all from Neha. "Please answer me. I made a mistake. I love you. Don't do this." Ethan stared at the screen, his jaw tightening slightly. The words felt hollow now, not because they were necessarily untrue, but because they had come too late. Love, he realized, wasn't just about saying the right things. It was about choosing someone every day. And she hadn't chosen him. He locked the phone without replying. Instead, his mind drifted back to the quiet cafe, to the girl who had sat across from him without pretending, without performing. Anaya hadn't tried to defend her sister. She hadn't made excuses. She had simply acknowledged the truth. And that alone made her different. Days passed. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan texted her. It wasn't planned. There was no grand intention behind it. Just a simple message. "Hey, thanks for the other day." He almost didn't send it, but he did. And when her reply came, "You don't have to thank me," it felt strangely grounding. Their conversation started small, casual, safe. At least, that's how Ethan justified it. They talked about work, about books, about random, meaningless things that somehow didn't feel meaningless at all. With Neha, conversations had often been loud, full of energy, sometimes even chaotic. But with Anaya, it was different, slower, more thoughtful, like every word had weight. And somewhere along the way, the silence between messages started to matter. He found himself checking his phone more often, not for Neha, but for her. A week later, they met again. This time, it wasn't accidental. It was intentional. The setting was different, not a quiet cafe hidden away from the world, but a park overlooking the city skyline, where the evening sun painted everything in shades of gold and orange. The air carried the faint scent of grass and distant street food vendors, mixed with the soft hum of life moving around them. People passed by, laughing, talking, living their own stories, while Ethan and Anaya sat on a bench, slightly apart, yet somehow closer than before. "You didn't have to come," Anaya said softly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I wanted to," Ethan replied, and he meant it. There was something unspoken between them now, something neither of them was willing to define. "Not yet. Has she tried contacting you?" Anaya asked after a moment. Ethan let out a quiet breath. "Every day. And I haven't responded." Anaya nodded slowly, as if she expected that. "She's not used to being ignored," she said. There was no bitterness in her tone, just understanding. Ethan turned slightly, studying her profile as the sunlight caught in her hair. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. It wasn't suspicion. It was curiosity, real curiosity. Anaya was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke. "Because I know her." A pause. "And I know what she does to people." Ethan frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Anaya's lips pressed together briefly, as if she was deciding how much to say. "She's always needed attention," she said slowly. "Always needed to feel wanted. And when she gets bored, she looks for something new." Ethan felt something twist inside him. Not surprise, just confirmation. "She didn't just hurt you," Anaya continued. "She's done this before. Maybe not exactly like this, but close enough." That hit harder than Ethan expected, not because it was shocking, but because it made everything feel intentional, calculated. "And you?" Ethan asked quietly. "Where do you fit into all of this?" Anaya let out a soft, almost humorless laugh. "I don't," she said. Then, after a pause, "I never have." Ethan felt that, more than he should have. The sun dipped lower, the sky shifting into deeper shades of orange and purple. The city lights began to flicker on, one by one, like stars trying to compete with the fading daylight. And somewhere in that quiet transition, something shifted again. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't dramatic, but it was there. Ethan moved slightly closer, not enough to be obvious, but enough to feel the change. "Anaya," he started, but the words didn't come, because he didn't know what he was about to say. She turned to look at him, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. The noise, the past, the betrayal. It was just them. "You shouldn't be here with me," she said softly. Her voice wasn't accusing. It was careful. Ethan held her gaze. "Why?" "Because I'm her sister." The words hung between them, heavy, unavoidable. Ethan nodded slowly. "I know." "Then you know this is wrong." He didn't answer immediately, because she was right. This was wrong, on every level. But then, so was everything that had already happened. "Maybe," Ethan said quietly. Then, after a pause, "Or maybe it's just honest." Anaya's expression shifted slightly. Not agreement, not rejection, something in between. "You're hurt," she said, "and you think this is going to fix that." Ethan shook his head. "No," he said, "I don't think anything can fix it." A beat, but this doesn't feel like a mistake. Silence, longer this time, more intense. The kind of silence where decisions are made without words. And then it happened, not rushed, not forced, just inevitable. Ethan reached for her hand. For a split second, she hesitated. Just enough to show that she understood what this meant, what this would change, what this would destroy. And then, she didn't pull away. That was the moment, the line, the one that should never have been crossed. And once it was, there was no going back. Because this wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was something far more dangerous. This was personal. And somewhere in the background of it all, without them even realizing it, the consequences had already begun. The shift didn't happen all at once. It never does. There wasn't a single moment where Ethan woke up and realized everything had spiraled beyond control. Instead, it crept in slowly, through longer conversations, lingering glances, and a comfort that felt dangerously natural. What had started as quiet understanding between him and Anaya had now turned into something neither of them could ignore, and yet neither of them dared define it, because defining it would make it real, and making it real would make it wrong. But reality doesn't wait for permission. It forces itself into the light. And in their case, it came crashing in without warning. It started with a message, not to Ethan, but to Anaya. "Where are you?" 3 simple words. From Neha. Anaya stared at her phone, her fingers tightening slightly around it. She hadn't told Ethan yet. But Neha had been trying to reach her for days. Calls, messages, questions that weren't really questions, but accusations waiting to happen. She had ignored all of them. Until now. Ethan noticed a change immediately. They were sitting in his apartment, the same space that once held memories of a completely different life. The atmosphere had changed, subtly but undeniably. The air felt heavier, charged. "What happened?" he asked. Anaya hesitated, then handed him the phone. Ethan read the message, and for a moment, something cold settled in his chest. "She knows," he said quietly. Anaya shook her head. "Not yet," she replied. A pause. "But she will." Silence filled the room. Not peaceful, not comfortable, but inevitable. "Then let her," Ethan said. Anaya looked at him sharply. "You don't mean that?" Ethan held her gaze, and this time there was no hesitation in his voice. "I do." Because this wasn't just about moving on anymore. This wasn't even just about betrayal. This was about consequences. And for the first time since everything began, Ethan wasn't reacting. He was choosing. "Meet her," he said. Anaya's expression hardened slightly. "No, you can't avoid her forever." "I'm not avoiding her," she replied, her voice sharper now. "I just don't owe her anything." Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Maybe not," he said, "but I do." That was the difference between them. For Anaya, this was emotional, complicated, painful. For Ethan, this was unfinished. And unfinished things had a way of demanding closure. 2 days later, it happened. Neha showed up unannounced. It was late afternoon when the knock came. Sharp, urgent, unforgiving. Ethan opened the door, and there she was. Neha. She looked different. Not physically. She was still the same person he had known for years. But something in her expression had changed. The confidence, the effortless control she always carried. It was gone, replaced by something raw. Desperate, her eyes scanned his face quickly, as if searching for something. Or someone. "We need to talk," she said. Ethan leaned against the doorframe. Calm, unreadable. "There's nothing left to say." Her jaw tightened. "Don't do this," she snapped. "Don't act like you don't care." Ethan almost laughed, but didn't. "You're right," he said quietly. "I don't." The words hit her harder than any anger could have. He saw it, the flicker of pain, of disbelief. "You're lying," she said, her voice softer now. "You wouldn't just throw everything away like this." Ethan's expression didn't change. "I didn't," he replied. "You did." Silence. Heavy, unavoidable. Then she said it. "Is it true?" Ethan didn't need to ask what she meant. "Is what true?" Her voice broke slightly. "You and Anaya." There it was, out in the open. Ugly. Real. Ethan held her gaze. And for a brief second, he considered lying. Not for her, but for Anaya. But then, he remembered the restaurant, the photos, the lies, and he chose truth. Yes. The word landed like a gunshot. Neha staggered back slightly, as if it had physically hit her. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not possible." Ethan didn't move, didn't soften, didn't explain. "You're lying," she said again, louder this time. "You're just trying to hurt me." Ethan's voice remained calm. "Funny," he said. "That's exactly what you did to me." Her eyes filled with tears. But this wasn't quiet sadness anymore. This was something else. This was rage. "She's my sister." Neha shouted. "And you were my girlfriend." Ethan shot back. Silence exploded between them. For a moment, neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. Then Neha laughed. A broken, disbelieving laugh. "This is your revenge," she said. "You think this makes you better than me?" Ethan stepped forward slightly, close enough that his voice dropped. "No," he said. "I don't think I'm better." A pause. "I just think I'm done being the only one who pays the price." That was the moment something inside Neha finally broke. Because this wasn't the reaction she expected. She expected anger, begging, maybe even forgiveness. But not this, not indifference, not replacement. You don't love her, she said desperately. You're just using her. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, because that was the one thing he wasn't sure about. But before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. Stop. They both turned. Anaya stood there. She hadn't meant to come, but something had told her she needed to. And now, here she was, in the middle of everything. Neha stared at her. Shock, hurt, betrayal, all colliding at once. How could you? She whispered. Anaya didn't flinch, didn't look away. Don't do that, she said quietly. Don't act like you're the victim here. Neha's expression twisted. I'm your sister. And I was your excuse, Anaya replied, her voice steady, but sharp. For what? Neha demanded. For everything, Anaya said. For always being the one who cleaned up your mess. For always staying quiet. For always pretending you were right. The words cut deep, because they weren't new. They were just finally spoken. Neha looked between them, her world unraveling in real time. This isn't over, she said, her voice shaking, but filled with something dangerous. Ethan met her gaze. Cold, certain. No, he said, it already is. And just like that, the last piece shattered, because some betrayals don't just end relationships. They rewrite them completely. The days that followed were surreal. Ethan woke up each morning to a silence that was heavier than any storm he had endured before. Neha's presence was gone. Her apartment keys left behind on the counter, her messages unanswered, her calls blocked. The life he had known, the shared laughter, the late-night talks, the dreams whispered in the dark, they all felt like fragments of someone else's story, a story that had ended without closure. But closure, Ethan realized, wasn't about hearing apologies or seeing tears. It was about reclaiming himself, about making the choice to move forward. And move forward he would, even if it meant stepping into uncharted territory. Anaya, on the other hand, was different. She didn't rush into Ethan's life the way Neha had once dominated it. There was patience in her approach, a deliberate quietness that contrasted sharply with Neha's chaos. Each interaction with her felt measured, weighted with honesty, a conversation where both were fully present and fully themselves. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, that presence began to fill the emptiness Ethan had carried, not as a replacement for what he had lost, but as something entirely new, a connection forged in truth, not convenience, not deception. He began to notice the subtle ways she cared, the way she remembered the little things he mentioned once, the way she laughed quietly as dry humor, the way she made the apartment feel warmer, calmer, alive in a different sense. Yet the shadow of Neha remained. The thought of her, the betrayal, the audacity, the charm that had once ensnared him, lingered in quiet corners of his mind. He couldn't erase it, and he didn't want to pretend he could. The difference now was perspective. Pain no longer ruled him. It sharpened him. He could remember her with clarity, without letting anger consume him. And in that clarity came strength, a resolve that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with life reclaimed. The community around him began to notice the change. Friends who had once worried about the distracted, restless Ethan now remarked on a calm confidence they hadn't seen before. He smiled more, spoke more freely, even laughed more openly, but never with the weightless abandon of ignorance. Each smile carried the depth of someone who had been broken and had learned to rebuild, stronger and wiser. Anaya, ever quiet, noticed it too. Sometimes she would catch him staring out the window, lost in thought, and instead of questioning, she simply sat beside him, offering quiet companionship. And slowly, that companionship became something more intimate, more charged, not in haste or desperation, but in understanding and shared experience. Then, months later, the inevitable confrontation happened. Neha returned. She didn't knock or send messages. She appeared at the door with a presence that once would have commanded his attention entirely. But now, Ethan met her calmly. Anaya was beside him, silent but unwavering. Neha's eyes flickered between them, realization dawning slowly, painfully. The power she once held, the one that had given her such confidence in her betrayal, was gone. She tried words, tried charm, tried manipulation, but all fell flat against the walls of truth and resolve that now surrounded Ethan and Anaya. For the first time, she saw not just a man who had been hurt, but a man who had grown beyond the limits she thought she could contain. And for the first time, she understood what loss truly meant. Ethan didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He didn't shout or accuse. He simply lived. Every choice he made in the days after that encounter, every word, every step, was a quiet but undeniable declaration. His life belonged to him now, and it would not be dictated by betrayal or deceit. And Anaya, steady, patient, honest, was now part of that life, not as revenge, not as a rebound, but as a partner who had been chosen with intention, with clarity, and with understanding of what love and trust truly demanded. They weren't perfect. They weren't untouched by the scars of the past. But in their imperfection, they found depth, connection, and a kind of peace that Naya's betrayal had once made impossible to imagine. In the end, the story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving Naya wrong or hurting her the way she had hurt him. It was about reclaiming himself, reclaiming agency, reclaiming life. And in that reclamation, Ethan discovered something he hadn't expected. Love could exist again, quietly, without the chaos, without the lies. It was honest, grounded, and resilient. It was better because it had been tested, because it had survived fire and storm, because it had been forged in the aftermath of betrayal and tempered in the patience and steadiness of Anaya. As they stood together one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon and the city lights flicker on like tiny constellations, Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a weight he hadn't even realized he'd carried all these months. Beside him, Anaya smiled softly, her hand finding his warm and reassuring. And for the first time in a long time, he breathed fully. No anger, no lingering pain, just the quiet certainty that life, no matter how cruel or unpredictable, could still be beautiful when rebuilt with truth, patience, and trust. Some scars never fade. Some betrayals never disappear entirely. But some choices, careful, intentional, and honest, can redefine everything. And for Ethan and Anaya, that choice had made all the difference.